Kieran Elwood pressed his forehead against the cool plexiglass window of the observation bay, his breath fogging a small patch as he stared at the creature inside the containment room. It paced in jerky, agitated lines, tail lashing, eyes blinking independently of each other. It was about the size of a Labrador, but covered in slick, iridescent scales. Its limbs flexed at odd angles, and its teeth far too many for comfort. "You brought that thing on board?" Dr. Velix's voice buzzed with incredulity. The alien vet stood beside Kieran, his tall, rangy body hunched slightly as if expecting the creature to burst through the barrier at any moment. "I didn't bring it," Kieran said. "It's stowed away in a cargo crate from the Cauldron Jungle. I found it while fixing a busted coolant line. This species is classified as unstable and potentially volatile. It should have been incinerated on discovery." "It was injured," Kieran said, turning to face him. "Front limb was bleeding, shallow breathing. It didn't attack me. Just made this weird yowling noise." "That yowl is a pre-attack vocalization." Kieran shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it was just in pain. It is a biological paradox. Its anatomy defies even the basic principles of vertebrate function. I am not even certain which end excretes waste." "That's not really my concern," Kieran muttered. Velix turned, his narrow pupils dilating. "Your concern? You are an engineering technician. You are not authorized to make decisions about quarantined fauna. And you're a vet, right? So fix it." Velix's jaw twitched. "I will attempt stabilization. But I am initiating full restraint measures." Kieran followed him into the containment prep room, watching as Velix donned a radiation-proof vest and selected a muzzle, an awkward contraption of interlocking restraints and reinforced mesh. "That's not gonna work," Kieran said. Velix ignored him, stepping through the decontamination field and into the creature's enclosure. The animal froze mid-step, eyes locking on Velix. Kieran watched from the monitor as Velix extended the muzzle slowly. The creature hissed, dropped low, and launched. Everything blurred. Velix stumbled back, the muzzle clattering against the floor as the animal latched onto his arm. Kieran didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand on the override and sprinted into the room. "Back off," he shouted. The creature didn't. Kieran grabbed a nearby metal tray and whacked the floor beside it. The noise startled the animal. It turned, ears twitching. Kieran knelt. "Hey," he said gently. "You remember me, don't you?" The creature tilted its head. "Yeah. You're not bad. You're just scared, aren't you?" Velix groaned on the floor, cradling his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers. Kieran reached out a hand. The creature crept closer, sniffing. Its tongue flicked out. "See? Not gonna hurt you." He touched its side gently, then let his hand slide under its belly. He rubbed in slow circles. The creature blinked. Then impossibly it purred. A low, vibrating hum filled the room. Kieran glanced up at the security camera. "You recording this?" "Hope so." Later, in the med bay, Velix glared at him with narrowed eyes as the auto sutures stitched his arm. "You were mad. You tried to put a muzzle on a wounded, scared animal," Kieran said. "It reacted like any dog or cat might." "That is not a dog or cat. That is an unclassified predator with a bifurcated neural spine and 6 stomachs. And yet," Kieran said, "it likes belly rubs." Velix didn't respond. The creature, dubbed Mog by Kieran, was moved to the secondary observation deck, a more open space with environmental controls that mimicked subtropical conditions. Kieran visited daily, bringing it chunks of protein paste and, occasionally, some of the hydroponic garden's squish fruit. "Still purring," he told Velix one afternoon. "You want to see? I would rather be ejected into space." Kieran chuckled. "Suit yourself." Over the next few weeks, Mog's health improved. The wound on its leg closed and its scales began to show a healthy sheen. It started following Kieran from one end of the enclosure to the other, pressing its head into his palm when he entered. But not everyone on the ship was thrilled. Captain Roveren summoned Kieran to the command deck. "You're keeping an unregistered, potentially unstable life form in a science lab. That violates Interstellar Health Code 14G. Technically, Velix is the one treating it," Kieran said. "She's not a pet, Elwood." "I didn't say she was." Ro tapped on her datapad. "We transport medical supplies, not jungle monsters." "She's not a monster." She nearly took Velix's arm off. That was before she got used to us. Before she trusted anyone. Ro sighed. We're 2 weeks from the Sestron port. You have until then to decide either she's gone by the time we dock or I report this. Kieran left the bridge with a knot in his chest. That night, he sat outside Mog's enclosure as she licked the remains of a protein bar from his hand. You're making this real hard, Mog, he muttered. Mog chirped softly and rolled onto her back, exposing her belly. Kieran reached through the bars and rubbed gently. The purring started again, deep and sonorous. You don't even know how weird you are, do you? The next morning, the ship jolted hard. Kieran hit the floor before alarms began blaring. All crew to stations, Ro's voice echoed. Hull breach detected in Cargo Bay 4. Kieran raced toward the bay. By the time he arrived, the emergency seals had closed off the damaged section. A small crew was already assessing the damage. Something hit us? Kieran asked. Looks like a micro-meteor or stray debris, one of the techs said. Punched through the outer plating. Kieran climbed the access ladder to the upper catwalk to get a better view. From there, he saw a thin, jagged beam of metal had punctured the hull. Near the impact site, 3 smaller containment cages were cracked open. Wait, Kieran said. Wasn't that the overflow cage unit? The tech nodded. Yeah. We were storing some spare fauna from the last survey. Unclassified types. Kieran's stomach dropped. How many got out? 3. Maybe 4. Kieran didn't wait to hear more. He sprinted to the observation deck. The door to Mog's enclosure was open. Inside, chaos. 2 of the escaped creatures long, eel-like things with legs were circling Mog, who stood protectively over a smaller creature that must have been hiding in the back of the enclosure. Mog snarled. Kieran didn't think. He grabbed a stun baton from the wall and leapt into the enclosure. The first eel thing lunged, and he jabbed the baton into its side. It screeched and collapsed, twitching. The second turned toward him. Too fast. It knocked him backward, teeth catching his shoulder. Pain exploded through Kieran's chest. He fell hard. The breath knocked from his lungs. Then Mog pounced. She tackled the creature, jaws clamping onto its neck. One violent shake and it went limp. Kieran lay on the floor, gasping, blood soaking his uniform. Mog patted over and nudged his face with her nose. He reached up weakly and touched her side. Good girl, he whispered. Then the medics arrived. Kieran woke in the infirmary 2 days later, wrapped in gauze and sore in every limb. His shoulder had been stitched and immobilized. The nurse told him he'd lost a lot of blood but hadn't sustained any fractures. Lucky, she said. Yeah, Kieran muttered. Lucky. Ro visited later that day. You saved the science deck, she said. If those things had reached the Arboretum, we'd have bigger problems. Kieran nodded. Mog helped. I know. We reviewed the footage. She hesitated. We're not reporting her to the Port Authority. Kieran raised an eyebrow. She saved your life. That counts for something. He smiled, wincing as it pulled at his stitches. She likes belly rubs. Who knew? Velix came in the next morning holding a datapad. I compiled her biological data, he said. Her taxonomy is unlike anything we've cataloged. But I think she's a juvenile. That smaller one she protected, it might have been hers. Kieran blinked. She's a mom. Possibly. Kieran sighed. Guess we're gonna need a bigger enclosure. Velix glanced at him. I still think you are reckless. But perhaps your instincts are not entirely unfounded. High praise. Thanks. Mog visited that afternoon, sitting patiently near the med bay entrance until security finally relented and let her in. She curled up beside Kieran's bed, resting her head near his hand. He reached out and rubbed her belly. The purring started again. The low chime of the med bay's nutrient dispenser was the only sound for a long while. Kieran sat upright in the recovery cot, one arm strapped into a dynamic brace that hissed softly every few seconds as it adjusted tension. A thin line of adhesive mesh still ran down from his collarbone to his ribcage, holding the dermal seal in place. Across the room, Velix stood beside a half-unfolded diagnostic array, arms crossed, gills fluttering faintly in agitation. "You've lost 5% of your lean muscle mass," he said, tapping the screen. "And your blood pressure is still too low for someone allegedly resting." "I'm not resting. I'm waiting for breakfast," Kieran replied, eyeing the sealed meal pod on the tray beside him. "If that's another algae wedge, I'm leaving AMA. You're on a high-protein recovery cycle, and you're not leaving anything unless your vitals stabilize." Kieran grimaced. "I'd kill for a fried egg." Velix squinted. "Is that the one where you consume the embryo of a flightless bird?" "Don't say it like that. Makes it sound weird." "It is weird." The door hissed open before Kieran could respond. A tall figure stooped to enter, skin a translucent lavender. Eyes set deep in a face that seemed chiseled from polished bone. "Great," Kieran muttered. "More company." The newcomer stepped forward and inclined his head. "I am Eric's security liaison from Sestron Port Authority. Your ship's incident report triggered an early pre-screen." Velix's dorsal ridge tensed. "That's not standard protocol. We're still 3 days out. There were discrepancies in your fauna manifest, and an unauthorized Class H enclosure was activated during transit. That drew attention." Kieran leaned back, wincing. "You came early just to scold us?" "No," Eric said. "I'm here to assess the risk level of the entity referred to as Mog." Velix's gills pressed flat. "She is no longer exhibiting hostile behavior." Eric's lifted a thin device and began scanning Kieran from top to toe. "You sustained multiple puncture wounds. Internal bruising. Possible nerve compression." "That wasn't her," Kieran said. "I've reviewed the footage. It was self-defense then. She protected me. She stopped one of those things from turning my liver into pudding." Eric's didn't blink. "Her physiology is undocumented. Her behavior is inconsistent with known predator-prey responses. That makes her a liability." Kieran sat up straighter. The movement made his shoulder throb, but he didn't care. "You can pull your reports and your risk assessments. But you weren't there when she stood between me and a creature with a mouth where its stomach should have been. Emotive logic is not admissible in classification protocols." "She purrs," Kieran said. Eric's turned to Velix. "Is that biologically verified?" "It is a low-frequency vibration emitted during physical contact," Velix said, reluctant. "Possibly a bonding response, or thermoregulation. She does it when she's calm," Kieran added. "Or when she sees me." Eric's lowered the scanner. "I need a live assessment. Bring her here." "She doesn't like strangers," Kieran said. "Then she can start getting used to them." Velix exhaled sharply through his nose slits but tapped his comm. "Enclosure 16. Engage guidance beacon. Direct Mog to Med Bay Corridor 1. "Gently," Kieran added. "She's not a crate of fruit," Velix snapped. A few minutes later, the distant clicking of claws echoed down the corridor. Mog padded into view, her posture low but not aggressive. Her eyes flicked to Kieran, then to the stranger beside him. Eric stood absolutely still. Mog sniffed the air, then approached Kieran's cot and rested her snout on the edge. "See," Kieran said, stroking behind her ear. "No teeth. No drama." Eric's held out a hand, palm up. Mog froze. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, sniffed his fingers, and tapped her forehead gently against his knuckles. Eric's shoulders relaxed, barely. "She's not a threat," Kieran said. "Not now," Eric's replied. Mog sneezed wetly in his direction and turned back to Kieran. "I'll file a provisional suspension of quarantine," Eric said. "But if she exhibits any further deviation from the current behavior profile, she won't. Your ship will be held at dock until a full containment review is completed." With that, Eric's turned and left, his silhouette vanishing into the corridor like a shadow slipping through smoke. Velix remained by the diagnostic panel, watching Mog. "She shouldn't have bonded that quickly," he said. "It's atypical. She likes me. That's not scientific. Neither is gut instinct, but here we are. Velix tilted his head. She mimicked your breathing pattern when she entered. What? She inhaled when you did. Matched your rhythm. It may be mimicry. Or something else. That's weird. Indeed. Kieran scratched Mog's neck. Maybe she's just trying to fit in. Later that cycle, when the crew lights dimmed to simulate dusk, Kieran was allowed a brief walk through the lower deck corridor. He moved slowly, legs still unsteady beneath him, Mog trailing a few paces behind. At the hydroponics bay, he leaned against the frame and looked in. The squish-fruit vines had started to overgrow the meshwork, their pale orange bulbs hanging low. She helped pollinate those, you know, he said. Velix, crouched beside the nutrient injectors, didn't look up. She licked the pollen off the intake fans. That isn't help. It worked. That's not the point. Kieran reached into the vines and plucked a ripe bulb. Mog sat and stared, tail swishing. You want it, you gotta catch. He tossed it lightly. Mog leapt, caught it in her jaws, and landed with a thud that shook the grating. Velix finally turned. She shouldn't be able to catch midair objects with that kind of accuracy. Her peripheral vision is segmented. She's adapting. Velix stood. Or she was engineered. Kieran froze. Say again. Velix stepped closer, lowering his voice. Her neural matrix is denser than it should be for her size. And her limb flexibility suggests artificial muscle grafts. You think someone made her? I think she was altered. Possibly bred for something that requires high responsiveness. Guard duty, maybe. Or something less benign. Kieran looked at Mog, who was now chewing the fruit with evident satisfaction. She doesn't act like a weapon. No. But she might have been trained to. The next 2 days passed in a strange rhythm. Mog became a fixture in the lower deck, often appearing near the galley at mealtimes or curling up beside Kieran's bunk when the lights dimmed. Crew members began to approach her cautiously, some offering snacks, others merely watching from a distance. She tolerated it all with quiet indifference. The only time she reacted strongly was when a maintenance drone dropped a wrench onto the deck beside her. She bolted, claws scraping, and didn't return for 6 hours. Kieran found her curled behind a coolant tank, visibly trembling. You're not dangerous, he whispered, crouching slowly. You're scared. She didn't move. He sat down beside her and waited. Eventually, she leaned into his side. By the time the ship made orbit over Sestron, Mog had become something of a myth among the docking crew. Word had spread fast about the unauthorized creature, the attack, the purring. Eric's returned, this time with 2 more officials. They wore identical black uniforms with embedded translation nodes and carried long, flat cases. We're here to transport her for examination, the shorter one said. She's not going anywhere without me, Kieran said. You're not authorized to accompany specimens. She's not a specimen. Mog watched, eyes narrowing. Eric's hesitated. Let him come. If she resists, it may prevent escalation. Kieran helped guide her into the transfer carrier larger than the containment she'd been found in. This one open-topped and lined with organic fiber. Not a cage, Eric said. More of a comfort pod. Mog sniffed it, stepped in, and curled up without protest. As they moved through the docking bay, dozens of eyes followed. Some curious, some wary. Kieran walked beside the pod, one hand resting on her back. He didn't know what tests they'd run or what they'd find. But as Mog leaned into his touch and began to purr again, louder this time, echoing through the sterile halls, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever she was made for, that wasn't who she was now. Kieran sat on the examination platform, legs hanging off the edge, watching the 2 Sestron officials feed a flexible scanner over Mog's flank. They hadn't restrained her, which he appreciated, but they moved like she might explode at any moment. Mog, meanwhile, was licking her paw and ignoring them entirely. Her neural response just spiked, said the taller official, whose skin had a translucent sheen like polished marble. She's aware we're monitoring her cortex. She doesn't like being hovered over, Kieran said. Try stepping back. That's not how neural mapping works, said the shorter one, adjusting a lens as wide as his own head. The field has to remain consistent or the data skews. She's not a dataset. She's right there. You're blocking her line of sight. Mog flicked her tail, then turned and lay down fully, nose resting on her paws. The taller one stepped back half a pace. That reduced it. Fascinating. She doesn't like being stared at, Kieran said. Join the club. Eric stood near the doorway, arms folded behind his back. Your relationship with her is unorthodox. Yeah, Kieran said. Well, so's gravity if you think about it too hard. The shorter official straightened. Her adrenal profile stable. No elevated aggression markers. But she has a redundant circulatory loop around the thoracic cavity. That's not natural. She was hurt back when we found her, Kieran said. Maybe it's scar tissue. It's engineered, the taller one said. Adaptive vascular routing. Probably designed to prevent shock during trauma. Kieran exhaled. So she was built for combat. Or survival, said Eric's. Those can be different things. She's not hurting anyone now, Kieran said. The shorter one tapped a small triangular device against his palm. We can't unmake what she was. We can only decide if she poses a risk. She protected me, Kieran said. She didn't run, didn't hide. That should tell you more than any scan. The taller official adjusted his translator collar. The scans tell us she's capable of overriding her own pain response and reallocating metabolic resources under duress. That's military-grade conditioning. She growls when power tools are too loud, Kieran said. Your military-grade asset hid behind a coolant tank because someone dropped a wrench. Eric stepped forward. What would you have us do with her? Kieran looked down at Mog, who was now dozing lightly, one ear flicking in a dream. Let her live where she's safe. That's all. The taller official exchanged a glance with the shorter one. There's precedent for rehoming bioengineered fauna, but it requires custodial oversight. I'll do it, Kieran said immediately. You're not biologically certified, said the shorter one. I've been with her every day for 2 months. I don't need a certificate to know she hates citrus smells and likes the sound of ventilation fans. That's anecdotal. It's care. Eric's rubbed his chin, the motion oddly fluid. We could assign a conditional license. Temporary. Subject to review. The shorter one looked unconvinced. You're proposing he act as guardian to a potentially weaponized creature just because she tolerates his presence? Kieran stood slowly. His shoulder ached, but he didn't wince. She doesn't tolerate me. She trusts me. That's not something you program in. That's earned. Mog raised her head at his voice, eyes half-lidded, and gave a low, throaty chirp. The taller official blinked. She's vocalizing in correlation with your speech pattern. She does that when she wants a snack, Kieran said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a dried protein wafer and held it up. Mog perked and trotted over, snatching it gently from his hand. You're feeding her artificial lichen strips? The shorter one asked, horrified. She loves them. That's not a sanctioned diet. She doesn't care. Silence fell. Finally, Eric spoke. We'll draft the paperwork. She remains aboard your ship under observational status. No transfers. No planetary access without clearance. You'll be held accountable for any incident. Kieran nodded. Deal. The taller official packed away the scanner. We'll need to log her under a designation. She already has a name, Kieran said. We require something formal. Designation M0G, said Eric's. Mog. That satisfies the system. The shorter one muttered something in a guttural dialect and left the room, muttering again when the door didn't open fast enough. The taller one followed after a brief nod. Kieran looked at Eric's. Thanks. I didn't do it for you, Eric said. I did it because she looked at me and didn't flinch. Mog sneezed again and curled up by Kieran's foot. Several days later, back on the ship, Kieran stood in the science bay as Velix adjusted the new enclosure's environmental settings. The room had been expanded with temperature gradients and a sun lamp that shifted color over the cycle. A filtered pool sat in one corner and a low platform ran along the wall for climbing. She'll outgrow this, Velix said. Then we'll rebuild it. You're very certain. She's not going anywhere. Mog wandered in, sniffed the base of a support pillar, and then immediately climbed halfway up it before flopping onto a ledge. She's adapting again, Velix said. That's what she does. You might consider that she's adapting to you, not just the space. Kieran leaned against the wall. You ever think maybe the reason she's calm is because no one's trying to control her anymore? She may have instincts we haven't triggered yet. Then we'll deal with them when they come. Velix tapped a small console. Her digestions returned to baseline. I've adjusted the nutrient mix. The lichen wafers are terrible for her gut flora. She'll be heartbroken. She'll survive. Kieran glanced around the room. You did good work here. I didn't do it for you. I know. Mog leapt down, landed with a heavy thump, and padded over to Velix. She sat looking up at him. Velix hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched the side of her neck. She leaned into it. I still think she's dangerous, he said. She still thinks you're annoying. Velix didn't move his hand. We're both right? Later, Kieran sat alone in the mess hall, a warm compress on his shoulder and a datapad in front of him. He'd been cleared to resume light duty, though the brace would stay on for another week. He scrolled through the ship's maintenance logs, noting a pressure fluctuation in hydroponics and a miscalibrated sensor in the waste reclamation vent. Mog sat beside him, occasionally licking condensation off the table. You know, he said, if I'd reported you back then, you'd probably be dissected by now. She blinked slowly. Not that you'd be easy to dissect. Probably take some kind of diamond saw and a team of very nervous interns. She yawned, a gaping stretch of teeth and tongue. I'm glad you stayed, he said. She rested her head on his boot. As the lights dimmed for cycle rest, Kieran stood, stretching carefully. Come on, let's get you back to your jungle gym. Mog followed him out, tail swaying with each step. At the door to her enclosure, she paused, looked back at him, then walked in and curled up under the sun lamp. Kieran watched her for a moment, then turned to leave. Just before the door closed, she purred. He smiled without meaning to and headed to his bunk. Some creatures, he thought, weren't meant to be understood, just accepted, and sometimes that was enough.